Hear words of faith from Exodus 19, verses 2 to 8. They had travelled from Rephidim into the desert of Sinai and camped there in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God, and Yahweh called out from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the house of Jacob, what you are to tell the Israelites. You saw for yourselves what I did to Egypt, how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. If you now listen to my voice and keep my covenant, then out of all people you will be my cherished ones. Truly, the whole earth is my own, but you will be a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. These are the words you are to say to the Israelites." Moses descended from the mountain. Summoning the elders of the people, he laid down for them the things Yahweh said to him. The people answered with one voice, "What Yahweh has said, we will do." For stories of fleeing oppression and finding hope, we give thanks.
Hear words of faith from the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus continued touring all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of God's reign, and curing all kinds of diseases and sicknesses. At the sight of the crowds, Jesus' heart was moved with pity because they were distressed and dejected, like sheep without a shepherd. Jesus said to the disciples, "The harvest is bountiful, but the laborers are few. Beg the overseers of the harvest to send laborers out to bring in the crops." Jesus then summoned the 12 and gave them authority to expel unclean spirits and heal sickness and diseases of all kinds. These are the names of the 12 apostles. The first was Simon, nicknamed Peter, that is Rock, and his brother Andrew. Then James, ben Zebedee, and his brother John, Philip, and Bartholomew, Thomas, Matthew, the tax collector, James ben Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and of course Judas the Iscariot, who betrayed Jesus. These 12 Jesus sent out after giving them the following instructions: don't visit Gentile regions and don't enter a Samaritan town. Go instead to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. As you go, make this proclamation: the reign of heaven has drawn near. Heal those who are sick, raise the dead, cure leprosy, expel demons. You receive freely, now freely give. For the challenge to reach out to the bewildered, harassed, distressed, dejected, and helpless, we give thanks.
We're very fortunate to have Jarrod McKenna with us today, and I'm also very happy to say that we've got the Act for Peace posters up around the church so that it shows you that we're on side. But before I hand over to Jarrod, we're going to meet some other interesting people. I'm going to ask Sandra if she'll come forward. And what I was going to say to Sandra was, who wrote the narrative of the account of Jesus? Can you raise your hand?
That was me, Sandra.
And then I'm going to say, oh, that's interesting, a bit strange, because I was expecting a guy called Matthew.
Well, Matthew is my teacher. We studied together at the same synagogue. We studied the Hebrew scriptures, the Torah, the prophets, and the wisdom literature. But Matthew died more than 15 years ago, and I thought it was important to write down and circulate his ideas, especially about Jesus being the Messiah, the Anointed One.
The Anointed One, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, in the great line of Israel, the branch of Jesse from King David more than 1,000 years earlier, as you sang in that first hymn today.
So who did you write the narrative to, Sandra?
Well, both Matthew and I thought it was important that the Jewish followers of Jesus had access to the Jesus story. I was mostly trying to encourage Jewish diaspora through modern-day Turkey and Syria.
So what was the purpose of the narrative?
You didn't just Google this, Des?
Yes, I did.
The AI clearly states that we wanted to demonstrate that Jesus is the long-awaited Jewish Messiah, the son of David, who fulfills Old Testament prophecies. We presented Jesus as the authoritative new Moses, who brings the new covenant or agreement, teaching about the kingdom of heaven and instructing followers of Jesus on discipleship and the universal mission. That's why, at the start of the story, I traced Jesus' genealogy all the way through those 52 generations, from Abraham through David to Joseph, the husband of Mary, the mother of Jesus.
Well, that's a bit interesting for us, isn't it? To Joseph, the husband of Mary, the mother of Jesus. So, why did you include the ideas that are contained in today's reading?
Well, the same reason. We know that Jesus had great powers, but we don't know all the things that he said and did. We know he had compassion for people who were lost, outcast, and unsure. In this story, I paint a picture of Jesus sending out his 12 Jewish disciples to do the same thing, but to focus firstly on the lost descendants of Jacob, those who did not fully understand the significance of the Jesus message.
Okay, so how do you think it was received? I mean, do you think that it also went out to non-Jewish followers of Jesus?
Well, there were many copies made, and I wrote in Greek, so I think probably it was received by many others. And of course, there are many people who have felt encouraged by the stories and find that it helped them as well. But you must remember that they also had two other narratives of the Jesus story. One by John Mark, a friend of the disciple Peter, and another by Luke, the physician. And both of those had a less strongly Jewish focus.
Thank you, Sandra. Very good insights into the gospel that you helped to write. Now I want to interview a guy called Ron. Ron is someone who is a part of the synagogue in Antioch in Turkey. So you've read this narrative, Ron. There's your microphone. You've read this narrative, especially that bit that we had today, and I wonder what you think of it.
Well, hello everyone. I'm Ron from Antioch. Don't let the Asian features fool you. I love reading this book, as a lot of it resonated with my own upbringing. You know, I know all the stories of Abraham, Moses, and David, and of course the prophets, because I am Jewish. For me, having the connection between Jesus of Nazareth and our Jewish hopes has been very encouraging. I go to the synagogue here and also meet regularly with other followers of Jesus in our homes.
So do you think that this book has added something to what you are learning at the synagogue?
Oh, definitely. It's like the other half of the puzzle, how the ideas from the teaching at the synagogue fits in with our new faith ideas about Jesus.
Well, does this lead to any conflicts in your community, Ron?
Yeah, there's a lot of clashes of ideas from time to time, to be honest. Some of the Jewish members of our synagogue feel that we are focusing too much on Jesus and that we need to reaffirm our commitment to the Torah, to the rules for living, and to be more committed to the right way of doing things. They are a bit suspicious of what we call liberty.
So what do you make of the excerpt today?
I think it's fine. It paints Jesus as a person who is filled with compassion and who wants to reach out to all in pain. Clearly, Sandra's Jesus wants the disciples to reach out to the Jewish people first, to those who understand the context of the coming of the Messiah, so that they can take the message out to others. I noted that later in the story, after the Easter events in chapter 28, Sandra says that Jesus sent his disciples out again to make disciples of all nations. In the Hebrew scripture, God says the same thing to Abraham. I guess you can't spread yourself out too thinly first.
Thank you, Ron. I also met some followers of Jesus who come from another part of Turkey, a place called Ephesus. And Ephesus is a tremendously well-known Greek city. So not too many synagogues there. So I'm now going to speak with Amber, if I can find the page. G'day, Amber.
Good morning, Des.
You heard what Ron had to say. Do you feel the same way about this Matthew's Gospel?
Well, not exactly. All I can say is that we are thankful that we had John Mark and also the physician Luke's version of events. And it was good that we were able to read or hear Sandra's version in our own language. But to be honest, we didn't really understand a lot of it. It seems that to understand it, we would need to have done a crash course in Judaism. I think it is encouraging that Jewish followers of Jesus believe that the Messiah is the fulfillment of their more ancient religion.
So how did you receive this narrative?
It does show Jesus is full of compassion for the downtrodden and the rejected. I think we can all identify with that. But I think it has led to even more intense conflict in our community. We also meet in homes, as there are fewer synagogues here. But our friends who are Jewish followers of Jesus seem to feel that we should all comply with the restrictions of their former religion. So here the clash is not so much between Jewish groups, but between the Jewish groups and us non-Jews, the ones they call Gentiles. I think the narrative Sandra presents adds to that sense of a them and an us. Why not send the disciples out to all the towns and villages? Why not have compassion for all people? Why shake off the dust from your sandals if you are not welcomed? Why not persevere instead? I have a lot of questions about this.
So do you think it's okay to have questions and doubts about this story?
I do think it's okay. Greek philosophy is grounded in argument and in dialogue. So I think it's a good thing to try and explore the meaning behind these stories.
Thank you, Amber. And finally, a perspective from our reader today who read the Gospel reading. This is Dave. You all know Dave well. He's part of your community. And so, Dave, I think that we heard from Amber that there was a kind of clash of cultures in the early church, especially around the Greek-speaking, non-Jewish members of the early church. So I wanted to ask you, and thanks for reading the excerpt to us today, which you read very well, by the way.
Thank you.
So I understand that you are Malaysian, Australian, of Roman Catholic background, and that you place yourself on the progressive side of Christianity. So what are your thoughts and feelings about the Gospel reading today?
Thanks, Des. Great question. Well, when I first read it, I felt uncomfortable because it doesn't seem to be very inclusive. However, having read what Sandra, Ron, and Amber had to say, I think that knowing the purpose of the gospel itself and to whom it was written helps me to think about what it may have meant to first readers like Amber and Ron.
So what have you gleaned from the excerpt that you read to us today? Did you find it helpful?
Well, I like the picture it paints of Jesus being full of compassion and love for people who are struggling in life. There is also a challenge to me to try to understand the Jewish context of the Jesus story. Sandra, Ron, and Amber all presented early Christianity as a sect of Judaism, so that context is important. The most important thing for me comes back to what Sandra said about it is a story and it was written with a specific purpose in mind. As progressive Christians, I think it is important to see it for what it is and not to reject it because it does not align with our 21st century sensibilities.
So what do you mean by that?
Look, it is important not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, but for us to immerse ourselves in the story and allow the power of the story to speak to us today. In my view, the disciples are sent out to be Jesus in the world, to be filled with compassion, and to be shepherds to the lost sheep. And we are all lost sheep from time to time. I like what Ron said about the story appealing to early Jewish Christians, but that later in the story, it broadens out to include all people.
Thank you, Dave. So I think that you have given us some important insights which will help us to relate to today's reading. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Jarrod McKenna.
Good morning, friends. I'm aware giving a preacher 10 minutes is a bit like giving an alcoholic one drink, but I will try and be a good guest, and I'm thankful for your hospitality. I flew in on Wednesday and went straight to the office. This is actually my first week with Act for Peace, and this is my first gig wearing that hat, and what a pleasure it is to be here. I should start coming from Boorloo, Wodjuk Noongar Budja, with words that a great Anglican minister from, Uniting Church minister from out west, who mentored me, who I'm deeply thankful for, that we lost in 2019. He would insist that I start with this, even though we are dozens and dozens of language groups from the lands that I've been welcomed and call home. Nungala Kuric, Iora, Mort, Kayankarek, Nijapucha. Reverend Seelan Lawson was a gift to these lands we now find on maps as Australia. I flew in on Wednesday and it's been go, go, go. And I appreciate the mercy of not having to prepare a whole sermon from the text this morning, but just being able to reflect. I had planned to do so in the 4 hours, literally 4 hours I had yesterday, which is the first 4 hours I had to myself. I came from a meeting with Byron and Jess Smith. People know Byron Smith, the ethicist, or Jess. People often think of me as the guy who started Common Grace. I was just the first CEO. Jess was actually the brains behind the operation. She deserves more credit than I ever do. And it was wonderful hanging out with them, and we started reminiscing about things in this city and across these lands that your church was first amongst those who jumped in. We started talking about the Love Makes a Way movement and being in the then Foreign Minister's office as we sat down, and Pitt Street Uniting support of us, as it wasn't yet a movement. Only days before I suggested the title Love Makes a Way, but Pitt Street was there from the beginning, wanting to do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with God. So it's a beautiful way for me to start. So I opened up what were the reflections, and I got a call from Caitlin Curtis. Is that a name that means anything to anyone? She's a First Nations theologian and author, beautiful writer, a Potawatomi woman. And she rang, and we haven't talked for like a year and a half. And she's like, Jarrod, do you have some time? And I'm like, well, I have 3 hours. Sure, let's chat. And she's like, I'm ringing because I had a dream, and I'm sure that Creator Spirit wants me to share it with you. I feel it's significant for you. Now, she didn't know I've just started in this role, that it's my first week, that I've just landed here, or that I would be here this morning. And she started to share this dream. And she started to talk about that we have lost how to care for the fire. And wearing red in the season of Pentecost, I thought, wow, what an amazing connection already. And she said, my people, part of the Potawatomi people, is that we are keepers of the fire. And she went on to say, we light fires, but we don't gather around fires. And she started to reflect on the reality of what's happening in Turtle Island, found on most maps as the USA, Canada, and Mexico, and the fires that are being lit there. And I found myself reflecting that as I flew out of Perth on Wednesday, Pauline Hanson was flying in, and I had a text message from a friend, do you want me to pick you up to go to the protest? And I said, I've actually just landed in Sydney. They joked, don't worry, I'll throw an egg at the redhead for you. They won't, but I laughed anyway. And I thought about the fires that are being lit here out of this deep need that people have as they look at their children and little ones coming up, and that life might not be as good for them. The reality of the housing crisis that we're facing and the amount of wealth that is found in a small percentage of our population and not in the rest. I'm from Perth. I'm from the mining capital of the world. Twiggy, Gina Reinhardt, I'm from the heart of that whole industry. And as you are well aware, money is being invested in certain far-right figures, albeit like my own people. My dad migrated from Ireland. He's from the north, but he was part of a monastery in the south in the 70s. We do often have red hair, and the danger, what happens that when we lose our stories of who we were before we called ourselves white, is we trade in our stories, our dances, our songs, our places for empathy and connection, and our grief for a cheap, thin lie that doesn't work. But people are lighting fires. People feel like we need to do something with what's happening. How do we respond in our unprecedented ecological crisis, where the reality is that the scapegoating game is back and popular again? And whether it be our LGBTIQ community, or whether it be our Muslim neighbours, friends, sisters and brothers, whether it be those who are recently arrived, be it refugees, migrants or immigrants, people are looking for a target because fires are being lit and people feel like things aren't right, things aren't fair. And then we open up today's gospel reading, we find a text about being sent out in the 72, and I think we need to pay attention to our dreams, because as the ancient mysticism of the early churches would call us to, there is the literal reading which brings us into the head, and then there are the deeper readings, what was called the mystical readings, which actually brings us into our bodies, connection with all of creation and the land, that which exists beyond, between us and beyond us, and asks us to connect. How are the 72 being sent out relate to this moment where we need someone to be sent out because we do not know how to keep for the fires? Caitlin's dream went on, and she talked about how people are lighting fires everywhere, but we are not gathering around fires. We desperately need fire in this moment. And our Lord says, and I wish it was already ablaze. The workers are few, but I'm thankful for Pitt Street Uniting and historically where this place has been. What you have risked for the lost, the last, the least, the left out, the looked over, those that are left behind. And at this moment in history, we need you to continue to do that work of justice, to continue to desire mercy, compassion, and continue to walk in that humble witness with our God. Because her dream went on to talk about, and I love this bit. And you know dreams, they're weird. Sometimes it's the pizza the night before. Sometimes it's our psyche just painting with our life experience and takes from the palette of what our days have been to serve us up something. But Caitlin said, the next bit is I got a text from another Irish friend. This one wasn't an Irish Australian, just an Irish friend. And in the dream, she receives this text and it says, Chloe is sick and in hospital and needs your attention. As she was sitting with this once she woke, she remembered that though spelt differently, the same pronunciation for her Potawatomi people is the word Chloe, which is an ancient Irish name, is also the word for praise. Caitlin sends me this dream and she says, we don't know how to care for the fires. We've forgotten to gather round. Fires are being lit everywhere and praise is sick. We cannot hear the praise of the birds and the land and the sky and the waters. Praise is sick. We've allowed theology to become something that exists in ideas alone instead of an embodied reality that is expressed as love between us and love for those that others want to leave out. Praise is sick. So in the short amount of time that I've had here, and I'm done, my encouragement is not merely the beauty that we've heard from these incredible people as they've shared the context there and the intellectual context now, but we are living in a moment with the rise of fascisms, plural, around the world, and we desperately need to be sent out by a non-violent Messiah, causing and calling us to see the fires and not put them out, but let them be a gathering place where we can be about the work of the restoration of all things. Pitt Street Uniting has been about this work for some time, so I'm not coming with a correction, only an encouragement. Thank you for your work and witness. May you leave here this morning in such ways that you know that you're sent, that this message and way of Jesus, this way of confrontational, non-violent, provocative love, this liberating love, this non-violent love is needed now more than ever. So don't light random fires. Learn to be a keeper of the fire. Learn to live a life of praise. Learn to hear all of creation beckoning you to the work of the restoration of all things. May the words of my lips and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable and pleasing in the sight of the one who deserves all praise. Amen.